Maggie O'Halloran in my garden here in Central Florida to talk about Ashwagandha, Withenia somnifera, and this plant is really happy any place that you would grow a tomato. So Withenia has a long history of use. We'll look at a map when we get back to the table, but this plant has a long history of use in a lot of cultures where it's hot and sometimes dry. This plant in Central Florida will grow as a perennial. In a lot of other more northern climates, it would be an annual, so it would be dying off this time of year. So much like a tomato here in Central Florida, I plant the seedling around April, and then I let it grow throughout the summer. And this plant, I've been playing with the best location for it. It would really prefer more sunlight than it's currently getting in this spot. But in an effort to have it as a perennial here in Central Florida, I tried to move it a little bit out of the sun so it wasn't quite so intense, and then it would also have a little protection whenever it gets colder in our winters here. So this plant can get up to 6 feet high, and you know it's ready to harvest when it has these little berries that I'll show you on my pictures at the table in a moment. But it has those berries that can be edible, but most people use them for seeds. They have a lot of seeds inside. And the leaves start to dry out a little bit. In a lot of locations, this plant is going to be one season, and you'll know it's ready to be, the roots are ready to be harvested when the leaves start drying up a little bit, dropping off. So let's head over to the table so I can show you some pictures of that. You can see here in the National Geographic desk reference to Nature's Medicine by Stephen Foster and Rebecca Johnson. They have this page on Ashwagandha, Withenia somnifera. You can see on the map here, this plant was originally, this is the green on this map is where it's the range in which the plant you would find in its native habitat. So almost the whole continent of Africa and then southern around the Mediterranean. Okay, this picture does a really nice job of giving you a visual on those berries. So if you have grown tomatoes, you know that tomatoes usually have, you know, that nice red berry or fruit that you're able to pick off. Ashwagandha grows its berries in these cool little encasing that are around it, and so the berry will start out light green inside and then get darker red, and then the outer casing will dry up and fall off, and you'll see it here. So these berries, like I said, they can be edible. They don't have a really strong flavor, and they're full of seeds. So the seeds are really what I'm aiming for with the berries there. The leaves have some mention in literature, and I work with it a little bit. I don't know if you could tell by my plant, by using the leaves a little bit in tea. They have some historical uses of using the leaves for analgesic, anti-inflammatory, and a little bit of sedative action with the leaves. But historically speaking, we're mostly accessing ashwagandha for its root. And so my plant isn't necessarily ready to be harvested yet, but I wanted to tell you what I will do whenever it's time to harvest. I will show you with this plant that is definitely not an ashwagandha, but in a plant, any plant, I should be able to pull up from the ground And then it would have, ashwagandha has a nice big root ball, and then I would trim off all the little roots and then make sure it's washed really well. And once it's washed really well, I would take that off. I would take a knife and I would chop it up really small, and I would lay it out on a pan to dry. And drying here in Central Florida is a little more complicated because we have so much moisture in our air. Make sure to comment if you have any questions about drying or harvesting ashwagandha. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you like and subscribe. So ashwagandha root, I would chop it really small and lay it flat so that it could dry. Drying method that I use here in Central Florida is an actual dehydrator, especially for those roots. But if you don't have access to that, you can put it on a pan really flat and making sure you have as much surface area showing as possible, and put it into an oven that has either a light, just a light can be helpful because it helps to get the temperature in the oven a little bit warmer than the air, and so the steam would come out of that oven. So is there a question?
It says, I'm in South Florida. What's your tip about drying herbs in these environments?
So for South Florida, it would be really similar to my experience here in Central Florida, because you have the same challenge with all the moisture in the air. And we might get rain now, so you might get to see some of it.
Tropical storm.
Yeah, tropical storm
Sally.
happening right here. So Central Florida, South Florida, anywhere that there's a lot of humidity, really, you're making sure you have as much surface area as possible, and you're letting it dry inside. Air conditioning goes a long way to help you with dry out herbs. Definitely not leaving it outside. I know in some of my herb books it suggests putting out a blanket and letting things dry out in the shade of a tree, but we definitely don't do that. I don't any time of year here in Central Florida. You can use the oven method with putting it on the pan, putting it in the oven, and leaving the door propped open a little bit. It works really well if you happen to have a gas stove with a pilot light, but even electric ovens that have a light on that you can turn on and prop that door open can be helpful. Your goal is making sure that you get it completely dry. Now, there are a lot of herbs that I use that I would cut them and dry them and use them in that form. But ashwagandha, I like to get it as small as possible, almost like a powder. And I might put the dried root, those chunks of dried root, into my really strong blender and blend it up as much as possible so I get that powder. But really, you could use those cut pieces if you don't have a blender that you could make it into a powder form. If you're going to your local herb store to pick up ashwagandha, the powdered form is probably what you're going to find. In commerce, it's mostly the dried, powdered variety, much like you see here. And powdered or by the root, you can smell ashwagandha. It has a nice nutty smell, and it's powdered, so it's really nice for me to add into recipes that I'll show you in a moment. Before then, I wanted to point out some of the really cool benefits of working with ashwagandha. Whenever I look at all of the benefits, I know why it's been a part of traditional herbal practices for so long. In this book by Maria Noel Groves, Body into Balance, this author has a really nice section on adaptogens. Now, adaptogens are a relatively new term in herbalism. Adaptogen is a term that was developed by studying different plant constituents that might impact the ability for Olympic athletes to be able to perform better and recover from intense exercises. And ashwagandha is one of the herbs that has been given this term adaptogen. It's a pretty small list. But in general, adaptogen means that it helps your body recover from stress. And so if you see this list of actions, the nutty aromatic root of ashwagandha is reportedly gives you the strength and vitality of a horse. And some people say it kind of smells like a horse, but I find it just to be earthy and nutty. It also nourishes and strengthens the nervous system, the adrenals. It has a specific action on the thyroid, where it stimulates the thyroid. So if you have a condition where your thyroid is already extra active, you want to avoid ashwagandha. None of what I'm saying should replace any contact that you have with a medical provider. I'm only here to share some historical uses, not to diagnose or treat any conditions. I just have personal experience with this thyroid action, and I wanted to share that with you. It also has some really nice actions with the immune function and decreasing inflammation. I think that a lot of the other actions, like increasing libido and relieving chronic pain, are connected with its ability to be anti-inflammatory. And some other additional benefits are increasing energy and helping with sleep. Now, we have a lot of herbs that if I'm having a hard time falling asleep, I might go to have a cup of chamomile tea or something. But ashwagandha is really helping to support my body in a way that helps me to stay asleep. So when you hear about ashwagandha being helpful for sleep, it might help you fall asleep at night. And I'm going to give you an ashwagandha milk recipe that I really feel like helps me to fall asleep, but the warm beverage I think is really aiding in that. Ashwagandha really shines at helping you stay asleep. So prolonged stress, PTSD, things like that, where waking in the night is really a part of your life and you want to support sleep, ashwagandha can be helpful in helping you sleep and stay asleep. Like I mentioned, ashwagandha can be found in powdered form at your local herb store. You can also find it in capsule formulations. Gaia has this thyroid support specifically for that thyroid stimulating action. Be mindful if you have low thyroid activity. For some people, taking ashwagandha at night can actually be kind of stimulating. So some people recommend bringing ashwagandha into your life either in the morning or a couple of hours before you go to sleep, just to make sure you don't have that wakefulness from the thyroid getting a little bit of a stimulant. So, like I mentioned, the milk. When I say milk, for me, I like to use oat milk. You could also use hemp or almond or cow's milk, whatever kind of milk you want. Creamy, white, liquid. You're putting it in the pan and you're adding other herbs that make it a really nice, warming beverage at the end of the day. Make sure to comment or ask questions. You can get ashwagandha in tincture form, but I really prefer incorporating the powdered herb into food. It's a really nice way to get it into my body. So one of our community graduates, Jules, or the Garden Jules, I'll show you her label. She's a South Florida beauty. You can find her in the social media landscapes as well. She very sweetly gave me a ashwagandha, rose, and cinnamon powder. So this powder, I wish we had phone smelling or something, because it smells so amazing. It has that nice, warming, nutty scent of the ashwagandha, along with the hug of the rose. And it makes a really nice, warm milk, evening time, delicious beverage, especially with a little bit of that cinnamon. So I'm putting whatever my favorite milk is into my pot. Oh, I have a question.
How do you spell that herb?
How do I spell ashwagandha? I have it right here on my jar. Ashwagandha. There are some places that I see it where there's an H. Let's see. Here we go. Ashwagandha. 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 Withania somnifera. So I have about 2 cups of my favorite milk in my pot, and I have it on a really low temperature because if you're using cow's milk especially, it can separate really easily, so you want to make sure you're not boiling it. You're just getting it warm, and I'm adding about 2 tablespoons of my powdered ashwagandha, and you can add the delicious rose and cinnamon, and it's just a little sprinkle if you're working with rose petals that are safe for consumption. You can just add a handful, maybe a tablespoon of those, or a teaspoon if you're working with dried. A little shaker of cinnamon is nice. If I am really in the mood for chocolate, this can be a really nice way to have a dessert experience after dinner meal. You have the milk and the ashwagandha, and add a little bit of cocoa powder or carob if you're trying not to have the caffeine of the cocoa. Carob is a little bit sweeter, so you wouldn't need as much maple syrup, or Rosemary Gladstar recommends using honey. I really like maple syrup. I think the way that the sweetness of maple syrup goes really nicely with the nuttiness of ashwagandha. So in Rosemary Gladstar's Medicinal Herbs, she doesn't specifically talk about ashwagandha in this book, although it's a beautiful book and I would recommend it for a lot of other reasons. She does have this wonderful recipe for cinnamon, ashwagandha, rejuvenating milk, and her amounts are really nice if you're making just 1 cup at the end of the evening. And of course you can double or triple it if you want to have the combination available to you to have, for a couple of nights in a row. Any questions? I think we have perfect timing, because I don't know if you noticed, we're starting to get a little drizzle. I'm about to take a shower out here in my backyard, which has its own kind of loveliness. Thank you for joining me here in my backyard garden to talk about ashwagandha, Withania somnifera. We talked about the use of primarily the roots on this plant. We talked a little bit about growing. Make sure you drop any comments or questions below the YouTube video. This will be around for a while in our Materia Medica section at the Florida School of Holistic Living YouTube channel. So like and subscribe us there, and back here in the garden, checking out all the plants. Thanks for joining me.